The Central Bank of Nigeria has dissolved the board and management of Union Bank, Keystone and Polaris banks. In a statement, the central bank said the action became necessary due to the non-compliance of these banks and their respective boards with the provisions of Section 12 of the Banks and Other Financial Institutions Act. The CBN said the bank's infractions vary from regulatory non-compliance, corporate governance failure, and involvement in activities that threaten financial stability. All right, Dr. Bati, news definitely making the rounds yesterday with regards to not just the sacking of these boards, but also reinstitution of a new caretaker board, well, chairman and director, executive director in these banks.
Okay, yesterday, there was a statement by the CBN dissolving the banks and the boards and management of 3 banks, Polaris Bank, Keystone Bank, and Union Bank. Union Bank, by extension, of course, Titan Trust Bank. And then, of course, by the end of the day yesterday, they had appointed, instructively, in a temporary capacity, managing director for those banks, and also 1 executive director. So what you have now, you have MDs in charge of the 3 banks, and at least 1 executive director. There is no board. How a bank will function without a board remains to be seen. So a number of questions. This was expected. The CBN itself had said it was embarking on a review of whatever transpired under the Emefiele-led central bank. So this is a possible outcome that could have been expected. The second part of it is that the CBN had an investigator appointed by the President of Nigeria, Jim Obaze, who had looked into activities of the central bank over a period, and whose report found its way into circulation and made certain specific statements, particularly about the acquisition of Union Bank, the sale of Keystone Bank, and the sale also of Polaris Bank, the emergence of Polaris Bank. So to that extent, what has happened is not unexpected. However, it seems to me that there are gaps in the statement by the CBN, raising certain fundamental questions that statement by the Director of Corporate Communications does not address. What are some of these questions? Now, the boards and management of these 3 banks have been sacked. So, who are the shareholders? Because there's no reference to shareholders in this, which means that some people still own that bank, so those banks. So there is a gray area in terms of the ownership of those banks. What happens to the shareholders? Because the CBN is saying it's enforcing the law, which is within its powers to do. And the powers that they have thrown up as a regulator is Section 12, C to G of the BOFIA, Banks and Other Financial Institutions Act of 2020. So if you have, and under that Section 12 deals specifically with the withdrawal of licenses from banks. But it also has other sections which says if you don't comply with certain provisions within BOFIA, then the central bank, as the regulator, can sanction you. And they have identified some of those. Failure to comply with regulatory processes, failure of corporate governance, questions about how those banks were acquired in the first place. So, to that extent, they are right. But who now is the owner of those banks? Because you can't just appropriate another person's property and leave it hanging. In the past, what the CBN did in the past was to create a bridge bank. After all, when they wanted to sell, take over Keystone, Sky Bank, they created a bridge bank, and that led to the emergence of Polaris Bank, and then later they sold it. Okay? So there is that lacuna in that regard. The second issue is that, about depositors' funds, about the stability of the banks. A paragraph in the statement assured us in that regard that, people should not worry. This has no effect on depositors' funds. And in any case, that's the primary purpose of ensuring financial stability. Now, if the purpose is to ensure financial stability, the question then arises, at the time these banks were sold by the Central Bank of Nigeria. Somebody was in charge of financial stability within the system. I think her name was Aisha Ahmad at the time. And they asked her specific questions. What happened? Did they follow due process? If they did not follow due process in the sale of those banks, what exactly happened? I think that, there are enough interested parties who would like to know. Some people have raised the question that why was Titan Trust not also suspended or whatever. Well, the last AGM that Titan Trust Bank had, I think Titan Trust technically failed to exist as a financial institution, having taken over 93.1% of the shares of Union Bank. And that's again why I raised the question about ownership. Who owns these banks? And that leads me to the next question. What is the CBN trying to do? Is the CBN nationalizing the banks? If it is, if the attempt is to nationalize the banks, then we need more explanation. And if the plan is to sell the banks again, then of course we need to know. Questions will be raised. You will recall that in the past when they took over Intercontinental Bank, Mr. Erastus Akingbola went to court to challenge them. Would there be court cases in this particular case? In the Eragbola Intercontinental Bank case, well, Mr. Akingbola, I think he lost. He lost in the courts. So is anybody going to challenge what the Union Bank has done? But on the whole, the question will be, so which entity will be responsible for the management of these three banks? They've appointed persons. Now, those persons, for how long will they function without a board? So these are the gray areas that they still need to address. But to the extent that they are talking about financial stability, safety of depositors' funds, which is the part that should be more important to the generality of Nigerians, that's important. But the final question will be the sanctity of transactions with the central bank. It was the central bank itself that sold these banks. We saw a situation where Titan Trust, a bank that was created in 2018, taking over a bank like a Union Bank that was established in 1917. And then Titan Trust Bank ended up just being a special purpose vehicle to acquire. So there are so many other questions. If there are infractions, if there are persons who have taken Nigeria for a ride, I mean, those persons must be made to answer for this. But of course, the long-term question is about the stability of the financial space. We hope that in the days to come, that the central bank will provide clarifications as regards some of these questions that have been raised.
Absolutely. Now, in terms of the report by Mr. Jim Oazi, there are some revelations that have come out of that report, and yesterday's move demonstrated that the presidency CBN was going to take on recommendations from this report. One of the things around the ownership of Titan Trust Bank, even though the bank had released a statement following allegations that it was set up by the former CBN governor, Mr. Godwin Emefiele, it was revealed in that report by Mr. Oazi that it was actually set up by two companies based in Dubai, UAE, and they were proxies used to set up Titan Trust Bank, especially to acquire Union Bank. So the aim was to acquire Union Bank. So there are areas around that. They say they've been able to question some of the owners of this proxy organizations. One is Luxus International, DMCC, and the other is Magna International, DMCC. They say that one of the owners is currently in hospital in Switzerland, so they are unable to reach out to him at the moment, but the others they've been able to talk to them and bring them in for a conversation. As was already established, investigations are still ongoing. In the case of Keystone Bank, they say that there's no payment receipt to establish what was paid to acquire the bank. The others, in terms of the other infractions as well. As was mentioned, they say that according to that report, Mr. Oazi had recommended that they were looking to recover the banks for the federal government, so the banks in question. And this is not the first time that the federal government has acquired, or CBN has acquired certain banks and set up or put up a new structure to manage the processes of the bank. With regards to the new appointees, in terms of the managing director of each of the banks and one executive director of each of the banks, looking at their background and portfolio, they've come from a strong background of banking, some of them from UBA in Sierra Leone, about 2 of them from UBA in Sierra Leone, one former MD, CEO of that bank, who's Mrs. Yetunde Oni, acting as ED of, I believe, Union Bank. And so they've put in temporary measures to ensure that they're able to fill the gaps. However, I don't know to what extent these principal executives will be able to act without the presence of a board. Again, going back to that question around corporate governance, it is important, and I do believe that in terms of selecting members of the board, it must be done through a proper process, and the individuals who serve as board members of the banks would have to come with strong track records, integrity, and be able to be entrusted with the manager, managing the process of governing a bank such as the 3 has been mentioned. Another question, or perhaps concerns raised by some players in the industry, is the fact that in anticipation of the recapitalization of these banks, as announced late last year by the CBN, it might perhaps not inspire investor confidence, especially because the reasons for the takeover of these banks, or the sacking of the board and the managing director, is still quite vague. Yes, the CBN, or it's mentioned from that report, that is due to, as a result of being able to maintain financial stability, corporate governance issues, the shady way the banks were being acquired or were acquired at the time they were acquired. It still requires a bit more detail so as to ensure that in the event that in the future an investor comes to put in money into a bank, the CBN doesn't come over and take it over with very vague reasons. There must be detail, and I'm sure that would happen in the next few hours and days with regards to why this decision was taken. That's one. Beyond that, it also sends the wrong signal to the to investors and the global markets, especially in the way that our banking system is run in Nigeria. And so whilst there must be very strong reasons why these decisions were taken, there must also be a proper documentation and information as to the reason why these banks were taken over and why new members in terms of executives were appointed in the interim. I think it would also be important to show or demonstrate the process by which these appointments were made, because when we're talking about due process, it still must take place even in the order in which these new executives are appointed. So as it's mentioned, it's an unfolding story. It's a sanitization of the banking industry. Again, just to emphasize, especially to depositors in these banks, that they say their monies are safe. And if you look at antecedents, it's the same. Your money is safe. There's no need to panic. It's just in terms of restructuring and being able to clean up the banking system following the investigation by Mr. Jim Obaze, special investigator appointed by the federal government. Move on to the next story. Entrepreneur and businessman Femi Otedola has donated the sum of 1 billion naira to the Lagos State Security Trust Fund. This philanthropic gesture is expected to enhance the state security network and improve on logistics and operations. Arise correspondent Niyi Oyelowo has details.
Mr. Femi Otedola's contributions follow some philanthropic endeavors which he had earlier scheduled to improve security initiatives within the state. This comes at a time considering the challenges faced by Lagos and its residents.
My father has taken an interest in this fund since its inception and has from time to time made contributions to it. Over the years, the fund has continued to live up to its mandate and has remained very relevant in the security architecture of our Lagos state. This is why my father has decided to commit another donation of 1 billion naira to the fund to ensure the continuity and critical work being done by the fund, making him to date the highest individual donor to the fund. Lagos State is one of the few states in Nigeria where people move around freely without much worry about security, even in the dead of night. In fact, in this crazy Christmas celebratory period we've just had, there has been no notable security breach. So we thank God for that. While thanking the gallant men and women who make this possible, we should also recognize the role of the Lagos State Security Fund in enabling them to do so. My father believes that when well-meaning Lagos residents contribute to this type of effort, Lagos will be safer and we will all be more prosperous. He therefore encourages all residents of Lagos, especially the corporate Lagos and high net worth individuals, to take a moment to reflect on the significance of donating to the fund and then make the decision to contribute regardless of size, as every donation has the power to create ripples of change.
And it's important because we're also starting the year on a very high note. It's important for us to do this simple but very important event so that we can indeed use it as a testimonial for others to also copy soon. You've mentioned very critical things that your dad, believes in what we are doing, what we've done in the last 17 years with the Lagos State Security Trust Fund. And more importantly, he's been a great supporter of that fund way from the inception. And you also attest to the fact that security, it's everybody's business, and you alluded to even the very recent, yellow tide season that we're still in, and there are no known breaches of major security issues in the state and in the city. I think this is a very important point to note, and we need to indeed first be thankful to God, but more importantly, know too well that people were out to ensure that that also happened.
The funds are earmarked for strategic allocation to various security initiatives, which include the provision of modern equipment, training for law enforcement personnel, and the implementation of technology-driven solutions to combat emerging security threats.
My father, Mr. Femi Otedola, strongly believes that what organizations and high net worth individuals can do, that what the legacy they can leave behind for Lagos is a safe and prosperous Lagos that allows people to live happy, healthy, prosperous lives. Because without safety, without security, the growth that we desire as a city and as a state is not really possible.
Officials of the Lagos State Security Trust Fund, while praising Mr. Otedola's efforts, pledged judicious and transparent use of the funds, with the prospect of attracting more donors into securing the region.
We got quite a number of pledges in excess of 2 billion. This was one of them, and it's been actualized here today. And we're very happy that we're starting the year on a good note. For Lagosians, as the governor said, Christmas was very peaceful and serene in Lagos. Daytime, nighttime, there's a lot of security, and we need to make and invest in it. So we're going to be calling on more meaningful Lagosians across the whole network to contribute meaningfully, because it's a partnership. The federal government does its quota, the state government does a lot, and the citizenry of Lagos have to also help, whichever way. We know we pay taxes, but this is more than taxes. This is about, securing our environment very well. So we're off to a very good start, and I'm sure we'll get a lot more to support us.
Femi Otedola is renowned for his contributions to various philanthropic causes. This donation is also reflective on the role the private sector can play in addressing critical issues facing the community. Ni Uilo, Arise News.
Oh, some good news this morning. Good donation, or huge donation there by Mr. Femi Otedola to the LSSTF. Dr. Batis.
Well, let me start on a note of full disclosure. I was in the pioneer board of the Lagos State Security Trust Fund, 2007 to 2011, before I went to work in Abuja. Our chairman at the time was Mr. Remi Makanjola. Our executive secretary then was Mr. Fola Atowori, who went on to become Solicitor General in Lagos State here. And look, that Lagos State Security Trust Fund was established. The initial work was done by the Tinubu administration, Tinubu as governor of Lagos State. And then it was during the time of Mr. Babatunde Fashola SAN that the implementation began. And it is important, quite encouraging to see that since our time, That tradition has been maintained from one administration to the other. The template, the vision has been sustained. And what is the vision? That the Lagos State government takes the security of everybody in this environment called Lagos State very seriously. Whether you are a foreigner or you are an indigenous or you're not a non-indigenous, your security and welfare is very important to the government of Lagos State. And having discovered, since the days of Tinubu as governor, that the federal government was not capable enough of providing security in the entire country, the Lagos State government came up with this model of the Security Trust Fund, through which government calls on concerned citizens, privileged citizens, corporate players in Lagos State to support government to secure everybody. And it's a complete template, even maritime. At that time, we were buying boats for, the maritime sector in Lagos. OP-MESA, there was OP-MESA. We were providing vehicles, logistics for the military, for the police, for DSS, for everybody. And there was even a call center, emergency center that was built at that time for rapid response to security issues in Lagos. And since that initial period, that has been sustained up to this moment under Governor Sanwo-Olu. And it is important to see that there are public-spirited individuals who continue to contribute to that, particularly at a time now when, there are security issues escalating, expanding in Nigeria. Which then brings me to the example of Femi Otedola, chairman of Geregu PLC and, largest shareholder of First Bank Holdings. Now, he was one of the first persons to contribute to this trust fund at inception. I recall that after the first outreach that we had, he donated 200 million naira. That's as far back as 2007. And now, many years later, he is giving the same fund 1 billion naira to further support it. That shows commitment. That shows public spiritedness. That shows that he believes in that overall objective of making this environment safe for everybody. There are others who have contributed, but I think to date, if you check the record, Femi Otedola has probably contributed the largest single amount to ensuring security in Lagos State. And I have every confidence that that money will be very well managed. Because in our time, the commitment was so much that in fact, each time we sat, we didn't take refreshments. We didn't collect sitting allowance. In fact, it was so bad that it was Mr. Alabi who was in charge of Lagos State Signage Agency at that time. We arranged that we will meet the same day that his own board will be meeting. And they used to give us out of their own food. That was the extent of the commitment. And that tradition has been sustained. And I think is what encourages people to see that that fund is carefully managed. And that tradition, being sustained is something that, Lagosians should celebrate. And Femi Otedola has shown that, look, philanthropy is something that means a lot to him. He has picked up the bills of sick footballers. He has picked up the bills of indigent students. He has paid school fees of a whole set, in, is it Augustine University? He has built structures there, and he continues to give. And I think that this is an example that other philanthropists should emulate. And to show that in his own examples, the fact that he had donated 200 million before did not stop him from now putting 1 billion on the table. And I end with a statement by the governor of Lagos State. He said, well, there is no limit to what people can contribute. And that's what that fund does. It continues to appeal to people to support government, to provide infrastructure for the various security agencies. So the governor is absolutely correct. We hope that somebody will also wake up tomorrow and say, oh, Otedola has put down 1 billion naira. Okay, I'm putting down 2 billion. And there are people who can do that to support government to make this environment safe for all of us. The important thing about the Lagos State Security Trust Fund is that, in fact, it has become the model for other states of the Federation who have been copying it. Well, they've not been able to do it with as much success as Lagos State. And I was once in a room at the federal level where, in fact, the federal government was taking a look at the Lagos State Security Trust Fund model. So that's the kind of thing, that is significant about the Lagos State Security Trust Fund. The fact that it has become a model and it continues to receive the support of public-spirited, patriotic citizens like Femi Otedola.
Excellent. Talk about legacy, not just in Lagos State, but also of an individual. So when you look at the man, Mr. Femi Otedola, he's from Ekpe in Lagos State, and he has a rich heritage and pride in Lagos. So this is what we call or refer to as Omoluabi in this part of Nigeria, a worthy son of the soil. And I believe that this is one example that ought to be taken forward, not just by Lagosians, indigenous Lagosians themselves, but even others who have enjoyed being resident in Lagos State, corporate organizations, individuals who would like to give, especially when we look at security in Lagos State. The LSSTF is a public-private partnership that's existed for 17 years, like Dr. Bati mentioned. And over that time, individuals and corporate organizations have given quite generously to ensure that they're able to support government efforts in maintaining security in the state. Having a look at the board, the makeup of the board, they are distinguished gentlemen who, I don't think there's any lady there currently, so I'm putting up that charge to include a lady in that list. But distinguished men who have excelled in the private sector. So for instance, you saw the chair of the fund, and I'm saying this because it's important when it comes to corporate governance and transparency around a fund. Mr. Kehinde Drosimieti was once the MD CEO of Skybank. On the board, we have Mr. Segun Agbaje, who is currently the MD of GTCO. We also have Mr. Ebenezer Onyago, who is currently the MD CEO of Zenith, and a few other corporate titans on that board. So in terms of having the best to manage the process, definitely there. Then if you go onto their website, you'd also have an opportunity to have a snapshot of what the monies that have been donated over the years have been used to do. Purchase of motorcycles to support community security, the Lagos Blue Line Rail providing security in that area, and a few of their initiatives well documented in order to promote transparency. I think that's excellent. So in terms of the work that the LSSTF have been doing, one of those agencies or those groups or those funds that are working quite almost silently but doing an effective job in Lagos State. Now to Mr. Femi Otedola, in December of last year, below October actually, there was a town hall meeting to review the successes where the monies had been spent at the LSSTF, and he made a pledge of 1 billion naira to the fund. This pledge, this visit by his daughter, Tolani Otedola, was a fulfillment of that pledge. So it speaks of something, integrity. Oftentimes to talk about, philanthropists who go about making pledges that do not have an intention to fulfill. We've held him to account, he made that pledge, and now this was payment time, and he's done that. Beyond that, I think it was quite significant that it was his daughter that went to represent him yesterday. The reason being that is that even if you will not do it for your sake, remember the next generation. Because at the end of the day, his children will go out. You heard her speak about the fact that over Christmas, she went out, whether it was afternoon or night, and she felt safe. So the reason why we must secure the state is not just for our own generation, but for the next generation as well. So I thought it was quite instructive that she represented her father, speaking for the next generation and being a face for the young people in Lagos State to secure the state for their sake. So this is a call to others to also toe the line of generosity, not just with the LSSTF, but other public-private partnership initiatives by states, not just in Lagos, but across Nigeria, so that together we can build a strong society.